Thank you, Dr. Roger Addison. We're friends, so I'll just call you Roger. So welcome to the Training Master Series.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
You bet. You've been doing okay with pandemic and everything?
I've been doing okay. This is my third month staying in the house. I go out once a week to buy groceries, but that's about it.
It is our honor to have you on the show.
Thank you very much.
Yes. First of all, normally we'll start with the training masters. Can you tell a little bit about yourself and where is your hometown? Where did you grow up, and something like also where did you go to college? What's your major, and how many years you have been in this industry?
Okay. Well, as you said, my name is Roger Addison. I live in South Salito, California, which is just north of San Francisco. If you go across the Golden Gate Bridge, the first town you come to is South Salito. I lived here for about, maybe 20 years. I lived in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, since I graduated from college, and that was for my doctorate, was in 1979. And I graduated from a college by the name of Baylor University, which is in Waco, Texas, and my degree was in psychology. And so some people ask me, how did I get from psychology to performance improvement? Well, most of the people that I grew up with were psychologists, and I actually started working with a group of psychologists probably in the early 60s, and they were pioneers in the performance improvement. Now, it wasn't called that. It wasn't called anything. It's just
right.
What we did. It's just what we did. But I worked for a group of psychologists, and they had some special projects around the world, and mainly in the United States. So that's how.
So you have been in this industry by rough count over 40 years.
Way over 40 years, right? Yeah, some of that was when I was in college too, but because in the meantime, it took me about 10 years to get my degree, my master's and my doctorate. So that took some time out of doing any type of working experience, but mainly, yes.
You bet. That's a very long career. And everybody's here on this side of the Pacific Pond is looking up to it. You're one of the models that we're looking up to in this industry right now. You know that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It's hard for me to sometimes think that I'm a model. But actually, I'll tell you a funny story. Is that one of my professors in college won an award called the Model Teacher of the Year. And so he said, well, that sounds good. Then he said, I wonder what the word model actually means. So he goes, he looks it up, and he says, an imitation of the real thing. So basically, an imitation of the real thing. So I think that's always been funny about what models are.
When we say the word model translated into English is model, but in Chinese it's more kind of excellent, or excellent or standard or way beyond the standard, something like that. That's why we call it model. But there's a little cultural differences.
Yeah, I think that makes more sense, because that's what people usually think, that a master performer is an excellent performer. So I think
you bet.
Right.
So how did you when did you start to get into performance improvement, and how, under what occasion? And somebody just come knock on the door and tell you that, Roger, you should be in PI, or?
Well, it's not exactly. When I was in high school, a group of psychologists were looking for students to basically test programmed instruction. And so I said, well, that was a good little easy job that I could do after school, and they'd pay me for it. So I thought that was a good idea. So then I just started hanging around these people, basically, and got to know and said, this really looks like an interesting field. So they basically hired me to work in one of their, what they call learning labs. And I did that. I did that for several years. But meanwhile, I said, I probably need to go get some education. And so that's when I went back to school and started working on my undergraduate work, then my graduate work at Baylor University. And that was, and then I graduated, like I said, in 1979, and I moved to California. Before that, I lived in New Mexico and Texas. But before that, then I decided to move here because there were more opportunities here in California. So I moved here to California and worked for a private organization as a consultant for about 3 years before I actually went over to a bank called Wells Fargo Bank. And that's and that's probably when I started, really practicing the science and the art of performance improvement with a large organization. And I was actually hired to do, now again, it wasn't called that, but I was hired to come in as looking for performance issues in the organization other than training problems.
You bet.
So it was not so actually, I didn't work for the training group. I worked for a group that was started around performance improvement.
So you just mentioned that somebody asked you to test a programmed instruction, and
Right.
in what year was that? Like in the 70s or 60s? Because
60s.
programmed instruction was 60s.
In the 1960s,
Yes.
that's right. I was in high school, and so that was like way before anybody was doing anything like program instruction. And those were actually the prototypes for
Right.
what we call online learning today.
Right.
You would see that today. So that's how really it got started back way before. And all these people that I worked with were students of B.F. Skinner, and who basically laid the foundation for performance improvement, or not performance, but performance improvement as well as programmed instruction.
So, do you think that the programmed instruction in the 60s really laid a good foundation for today's e-learning or technology-enabled learning?
Yeah, I do, and I wish that I would see the online learning go back to some of their roots and see some of the research that was done early, because I don't think online learning today is as good as it should be. And if you look at now what's happening, since a lot of the students around the world are now doing online education, it's really not working as well as it could. And because the technology, and when I say technology, I'm talking about the computer technology, is not that great, but the technology of instruction, which is basically lacking also. That's my opinion.
You bet.
Right.
So that's something new that I never heard from you about e-learning. Why don't you think, Roger, that e-learning isn't as good as it should be today?
I think that what they've done is taken some of the principles of classroom instruction and tried to put it online. And it just, in my opinion, it just doesn't work that well. And then also, I'll tell you frankly, is that when you go into any type of e-learning or webinars, anything like that, I have never, and I mean I'm talking about never, had a good connection, or it's always something going wrong with the technology on the other end. And I always find that very, very frustrating. I was actually, again, I was at the awards ceremony the other day at SBI, and
yes.
I was sitting there and listening to Allison Rossett, who was a wonderful presenter.
Right.
All at once the system would go down for no reason that I could figure out. So you'd wait, and then it would come back on, and then she would start again. And so I'm not saying that always happens, but it happens enough that it basically is very disrupting to the learning process, I think.
So it is not, but based on what you just said, is not only on the tangible technology side, but it's also the classroom instructional technology side. Is that true?
Right. I just don't. Well, there are exceptions to that, I understand, but generally speaking, that a webinar has to have a lot of good sound instructional background in order for it to be good. And that takes a lot of energy to develop those lessons, develop those instructions online. Again, that's not my expertise. So I'm just saying what things that I have observed over the years of looking at performance or programmed instruction, and as well as online learning.
You bet, you bet. But what you said is you're not alone. A lot of people that I've interviewed, so far, I have Elaine and Roger Addison. Roger Kaufman and Bob Pike the other day, and also Jim. So they all said that all mentioned, especially Bob Pike. Bob said because he's doing a lot of instruction, classroom instruction now, he's converting a lot of his face-to-face instructor-led ILT, instructor-led training to online. And he said it's not just like the old days. It should not be the page turner. You electrify all the training materials, and then you call it your fabulous e-learning. It's not like that.
I know, and that's what the problem is. They've tried to put page turning into lectures, and again, this is not the format that we're using here is okay because it's a conversation and interview. But people just sit there in front of their screens and just lecture, and you have no idea what the interaction is with the students. And I think that's a real downside of people putting these things online.
You bet. Right. You bet. So that's so you have been. If you were asked for testing for the program of instruction, and then so you started in the 70s when you were pursuing your PhD, right. And I figure out you probably spent a lot of years writing your dissertations, and then in the 80s and 90s, and after the millennium, and then now after millennium already 20 years. 20 years. So before the millennium, and what do you see how human performance technology or HPT or performance improvement evolved? What's the difference? How was it like in the 70s, 80s, or 90s, or something like that?
I always call it performance improvement rather than HPT, because I think HPT, human performance technology, always was a hard term for people to understand. And in particular, when you got to the word technology, that's something that doesn't, everybody thinks about machinery, and human performance technology has really nothing to do with machinery. If you actually look up the word technology is applied science. And so to me, performance improvement is applied science to people, to processes, and to the organization. And that's how I've always looked at a performance improvement. When I graduated, as mentioned, from college in the 1970s, is that there wasn't much information around performance. There were a few books. You had to go to ISPI, the International Society for Performance Improvement, to find out anything about what the field was doing.
At that time was NISPI, if I'm correct.
That time it was actually my first meeting I ever attended. It was called the National Society for Programmed Instruction. Instruction,
yes.
So over the years, it's changed to performance improvement. And to me, it makes more sense to call it performance improvement. And so that's what I've always practiced, performance improvement. But one of the changes that when I came to California, the group of another group of psychologists I worked with, they sent me to a Gary Rumler workshop. And that was in the early 80s. It was maybe around maybe the latter part of 1970. And so there's where I started getting some more formalized models and tools and resources around performance improvement to work in industry. So that's, I think, was probably some of the major points. And then, like I said, in 1983 is when I went to work for Wells Fargo for an organization or for a woman who said, I want you guys to come in, and I want you to be consultants. She didn't call it performance consultants, but I want you to be consultants and look at other things happening in the bank, other than training issues or training solutions. And that's when we really started looking at the whole issues around what are causing some of the performance problems or issues in organizations rather than just training, because the people were fine. It was some of the systems that were getting in the way of them performing correctly.
Was that in the 90s or 80s?
80s, 1983. That's when
83.
When I worked for Wells Fargo.
Mm-hmm.
And then for 17 years after that, is that I went from working, being hired, and eventually I started running the department, performance improvement department. It wasn't called that, but that's what we did.
What was called then?
It was called Staff Development and Resources.
Got it.
I can't remember exactly what it was called. We never
Sure.
called it that, but I mean, I think it said that's what it said on the organizational chart.
Right. Because I was assuming probably was called personnel or something, because those are the popular names at that time.
It wasn't.
I was just assuming.
Now, it started in the personnel department, but and then turned into human resources. But then eventually I went to work for a line organization. Mm-hmm. So it came out of the personnel or the human resources area and into the line, which was a major shift on the work that I started doing, because I was closer to actually what was happening in the organization on the line.
A line organization, what do you mean?
Okay. I'm not sure. Well, you're probably structured the same way. You have people, staff people, like training, human resources, marketing. Those are staff positions. Line positions are those people who have actually interact with the customer.
Got it. I got it. I thought it's the name of a company.
No, that's all right. That's all right.
Yeah, the line workers or the line staff. Yeah, right. Got it.
People actually doing work that make a difference for their customers.
Yes, got it. So what do you see? What happened at NISPI in the 1980s was called NISPI, and then probably in the 95 was changed to ISPI. What's the occasion? Why was it changed to ISPI, and what's the development?
I think what you started seeing is that a lot of the performance issues were not training issues.
You bet.
And so programmed instruction was it was more of a historical framework. Then it became more a learning aspect of it. But then they even found out, we're not solving all the problems or the issues in organizations if we limit ourselves to just looking at instruction. And one of the names of ISPI was also called performance and instruction. So they got rid of the word instruction and just went to performance improvement. Along the way, the journals and all that, all the historical work were always called performance improvement. So it just we just dropped the name of instruction along the way, because too many of us were just figuring out that this is not solving the big issues of organizations. And then you also then start seeing people like Tom Gilbert and Gary Rumler and Don Toasty and Roger Kaufman and Allison Rossett started writing about some of these issues in the organizations and seeing there are other models we should be using. Margot Murray comes up with her whole work around mentoring.
Coaching.
Right, coaching. So there became a lot of other interventions besides just learning interventions that we were looking at. And then you started seeing that learning interventions probably had not much to do in reality with once somebody was actually trained to do their job, and then something came along where they were not as productive. There was something else usually in the organization that was going on that we had to figure out what it was.
You just mentioned twice that in in your answer just now, in your talk just now, you mentioned twice that training is not the only issue. And I know that right now you've done a lot of consulting projects. First of all, is that all you do, consulting projects right now?
Right now, that's all I do is consulting, right?
Okay. And so you have seen a lot of organizations. You probably is one of the, I'm assuming that one of the conclusions that you are, tell us more about it. Training is now the solution, because we got millions of viewers in China and other developing countries. So tell us about it.
I've worked in many countries, at many developing countries, and I do understand that when people are first coming into the business world or the working for their living, they need the acquisition of skills and knowledge. They need the skills and knowledge to do their work. So I'm not saying that's not the right thing to do. But once somebody has the skills and knowledge and actually doing the work, and then you see the productivity or the worker not performing at the level that we think they should, it's probably not the performer who's having the problem. It's probably something in the system that's getting in the way, that he or she is not doing their best to work. So what I've just found out is when I come in, they say, well, can you come in and give us a training course? And I'll say, well, tell me some of the things that are happening. They say, well, we're just not getting the productivity out of the people that we should. Then you say, what did they go to class? Oh, yeah, they went to class. Did they do well in class? Oh, yeah, they did well in class, but now they're on the job and they can't perform as well as they should have. Well, that tells me something about maybe the training, that the training was not as, I don't want to say as good as it should have been to transfer to the job. And so that's the things I see. So that's how I work mainly. And I'll give you a little example.
You bet.
We were called in to and there's some important words I'm going to tell you about when I tell you the story. We were called in to do some retraining of a group of workers who basically were at a computer center and a call center like.
Yep.
And what had happened is that they moved the call center to a new location. Okay. So they said, and then after they moved to a new location, productivity went way down. So they said, what we'd like to do is come in and retrain all of our people. Mm-hmm. And so I said, well, can I come out and look and see what's going on and ask you a few questions before we go out and retrain all these people? Because training is a very, very expensive in any organization. It's probably one of the most expensive things you can do.
Very expensive in your view.
Right. So what I went in there and found out two things. I said it wasn't happening to every shift. There was a morning shift, there was an afternoon shift, and there was an evening shift. So three different. So in the morning, everything was fine. All the people were at their productivity level was just fine. And the evening shift, all of those people were just fine. So I thought, well, first of all, we shouldn't train everybody if they're already doing it. Why train everybody? So I said, well, what's happening in the afternoon that's not happening in the morning or the evening? So we sent out a group of people just to look around. And what had happened is that I told you these people were on big computer screens. And in the afternoon, because of the lighting conditions, there was a lot of glare on the computer screens. So they were just making a lot of mistakes because they couldn't see the screens accurately. And nobody thought about, well, maybe we should just put up some curtains, or maybe we should just put some shields over the screens or something like that in order for the productivity. That was our recommendation. And guess what happened? Productivity went up. So there was no training involved. What we did is we changed the environment. So
I'm going to say it's one of those early days in the 30s, maybe the Hawthorne effect, right?
Well, it wasn't exactly the Hawthorne effect, but yeah, but
something similar. They found out.
I know what you're talking about. Yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes the environment basically we change the environment and productivity goes down, you say, well, maybe we should retrain those people. And the answer is probably not. If somebody is doing their job,
right,
and now they're not doing their job, is probably something else going on. And that's what I'm suggesting, that we probably go take a look and do some observation and ask some questions and find out actually what's going on here.
that's an excellent example. It is, even though it sounds very simple, but it's very crucial, and it means money. I mean, it means business. I mean, the business. It also means results.
Right.
I think that's a very vivid example, even though it sounds small, but in real world it's not, because what you give us is even though it's a small, maybe there are many. There are other factors that are in the way of the performance results, and you just gave us one example, one factor, that is lighting. The environmental. Maybe there are process, there are like tools, there are like management styles, and team atmosphere or something like that.
Well,
Team morale.
I think I think what you're doing is you're listing all the other alternative interventions or solutions to performance problems. And rarely do we see that after somebody is doing the work and been trained, that it's going to be not more training, unless it's a new job. I'm not suggesting it's not a new job. Or sometimes organizations have what we call compliance training. And that is something that maybe the federal government says we have to have training around safety procedures.
Right.
Things like that. Now those are things that we just do. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about doing your job is a total different thing. So I'm saying if you've got good, if you put good instruction together and people can do their job and transfer back to their job, then we have something that is useful. And now we look back at the job and see what's happening.
When you do your consulting projects on a daily basis, and you work with a training department for most of the cases, right?
It can be training departments, it can be marketing departments, it can be
right.
Like online departments. It can be lots of different things. So just who brings you in? So that's the things that who brings you into the organization.
Right, because a lot of viewers, there are millions, there are a lot of them, and then they're in the learning development industry. So, as I'm sure that you have worked with a lot of training department folks, and in your client organizations, and you probably seen them struggling. You probably seen them struggling. What's the value of training? What's the problem? Why can't I solve our business problems? Something like that. So, what's your advice to them if you are facing like a lot of them and the training function people?
I think I try to show rather than tell. And I was working with a group of senior managers from a large insurance company, and it was a learning and development organization. And I have a little I don't want to say test, a little case study that I give people, so they can kind of discover whether or not training would make a difference to their own success.
Right.
I give this little discussion with them, and what they do is discover that training is not the issue. And this goes back to Tom Gilbert, is that it's usually clear expectations, that people don't have clear expectations of what they're supposed to do. They usually don't have the feedback of what they're trying to accomplish. They basically don't have the skills, and not the skills, but they don't have the resources to do their job, and they don't necessarily have the incentives to do their job. They discovered that on their own. And it's always amazing. These people were amazed that they did not choose that learning was going to be a solution to their performance issues in their own organization. Now, I could have told them that, and they would have said, well, you're just trying to sell a product.
Right.
And so I don't have any products to sell. My product is improving performance. So that's how I look at it. So I think telling people, that it isn't a training issue, you got to show them or work with them or have a discussion with them around performance improvement works and how it would be what would benefit to them and their organization.
Like in the movie Jack McGuire, show Tom Cruise, show me the money. Show them the facts and numbers, right?
Yeah, show me the research, show me the data, show me what's happening. So that, I think, goes back into the whole idea. Observation and questioning people are one of our really skills that we should have as performance consultants. And mainly going in and looking, just observing what is happening in the organization. And you find out a lot of things that is really quite interesting.
And when they observe, they should really take a truly systematic view.
Well, they should take not only a systematic view, step-by-step view, but they also should take a systemic systems view and seeing how all the other systems play together so the organization can work at their peak performance.
That really comes to, Roger, the RSVP, the famous and well-known, the one and only RSVP, because the reason I'm asking this question on behalf of myself, and our team, including my partner, Hui, you know Hui, Ding Hui. Yeah, and we're good old friends. And we have been teaching our management GPS-IE model for hundreds of workshops. Each one runs for 2 days, lasts for 2 days. And every morning, the first morning, we always teach RSVP. And of course, just for the viewers, RSVP is the first 4 basic principles of the 10 standards. And Roger, we know that you came up with the word, correct me if I'm wrong, you came up with the word RSVP, the first 4 principles. Was that correct? And how did you come up with it and why?
Let me go. I'll give you a little bit of another story about that.
Please.
When ISPI first started, there were a lot of people who had a lot of different models. And what we call it was ISPI was model driven. So there was models from Gary Rumler. There were models from George Harless. There was models from Don Toasty. So there were lots of different models. So what we decided to do is we called a summit of all these basically performance improvement consultants, trying to figure out what was common to all other models. And what we found out, there were 4 things common to all their models. And the 4 things common, after I discussed it, the 4 things they all agreed on, that was common, was RSVP. They all focused on results. That was the R. And by the way, they didn't call it that way, but that's how I interpreted it. Then they said the S, they were all systems thinking or systemic thinking. That was the S. The V was they added value, but also they measured. But they said, how could we prove what we do? So we added value to the organization. And the 4th one was P, is that they all had partners either with their clients or other performance improvement professionals. So that became the basic standards or the basic principles of performance improvement. And then the other 6 areas were dealt with more of instructional side. But I was more interested in what was the basic principles of all the models. So that's how RSVP. And so I just sort of put it together and it became out RSVP.
Oh, thank you for doing that. You have done a great contribution to the industry, actually, and became the foundation, the basis of the fourth 4. We call it the basic principles of the 10 standards.
And I think if you think about it, is that if we always think about what results we're trying to achieve, what systems do we use to achieve those results, how do we measure and add value to those results, and then who do we work with in order to achieve those results? I mean, that's kind of what RSVP is all about.
Tell us a little bit about why RSVP comes from in front of the other 6 approaches.
Well, I think because RSVP goes across all of the models. So no matter what model we're using, they all have RSVP as part of it. So I think the other thing is important. The other thing too, remember, there's one other thing too, is that we also discovered when you look for RSVP, it was another model came out later. It was called RSVP plus. And the plus was that when you use it, you've got to be solution neutral and a solution appropriate. So that was just another little add-on to the RSVP. But again, RSVP goes across all models, instructional or non-instructional models. I think that's why you see it comes first.
You bet, you bet. So RSVP plus, just says solution
neutral.
Neutral, right. Solution. Tell us a little bit about solution neutral.
Okay, if you go in and do any type of analysis or any type of work in an organization, and you have a solution in the back of your head, basically your observations and your questions will lead you to that solution. And so you've got to go in as best you can, saying, I don't know what the solution to these issues are. So if you become solution neutral in your questions and your observations, then you can probably get an appropriate, what's appropriate for the organization. So I think that's when you see the RSVP, and then going around, what is it, solution neutral as well as solution appropriate.
You bet. So solution neutral basically is do not to avoid any prejudgment or pre-assessment. I mean, or any just assumptions. You avoid anything like you have a conclusion before you go in, even.
Well, and again, when that came about, is that when I told you when I worked for the bank, you'd have people come in and try to sell their product.
Right.
So I said, well, first of all, why don't you do a little analysis or find out actually what's going on? And they, well, that's a great idea. But every time they did that, guess what always the solution was? The product came in with trying to sell me. So I said, maybe there's something weird, maybe there's something strange about this whole thing about maybe they weren't so solution neutral. They already had a product in mind. So they're asking the wrong questions.
Yeah, yeah. There's a metaphor when you have hammers in hand, you see everywhere. You see nails are everywhere.
And always, and then the hammer always was their product.
Exactly. So in our practice, we call the RSVP the basic principles among the 10, and then the other 6 because they're really systematic approaches. Is that fair to call them that way?
Yeah. It's a systematic approach. Yes.
Right.
Again, there are lots of systematic approaches out there, and that just happens to be one of them. But again, in our work, we need to take a systematic approach to coming up with performance improvement solutions.
Well, again, thank you for creating RSVP because it's been there for how many years? When did you create the RSVP specifically? Which year?
It's been, I can't remember exactly which year. There's a paper that was done on it. But again, it was probably done in the 1990s, probably 1990s. Yeah.
1990s.
Right. So probably the middle of 1990s.
Just around the time when NISPI became ISPI, something like that.
Probably a little bit after that, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Because we do want to dig back to the history and see how, how long did it take for you to come up with our RSVP?
Well, I think, actually,
a couple months or a year.
Yeah, once we called the summit of all these different people sitting in a room, and we started mapping them out. And a person that I work with, Lynn Kearney.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, Lynn started making these drawings on the board, and you started seeing all the different words that were being used, the similarities, and all these things were going on. So you started just looking at the graphics she made and says, "Oh, look at all the similarities we have."
Right.
I think that's important too. Is that if we can make a picture out of something, it almost leads us into coming up with some of our conclusions. Gary Roman always says, the first thing I would try to do is trying to make a picture of something that cleared up how he could see the world. So that
You
was,
bet. You bet. You have mentioned some great names, like, and also, by the way, Lynn Kearney is also on my list to interview. She's a great visual artist.
yeah, actually,
And
the book that I did was Lynn Kearney, Carol Haig, and myself who did that, because when we came up with the idea, we wanted a lot of pictures. Thank you. and it's in Chinese also.
I know that.
So what we wanted to do is have all the illustrations, because people kept asking us, what are some of the models we should be using, and
Right.
some of the the visuals. And so Lynn was there to help us with, and she also with the writing of it too. She did a good job on writing some of the
You bet.
Yeah.
You bet. So you have mentioned some of the greatest and the names in the field. Who? I mean, can you give us who are the most influential on your career?
Well, I'll give you some names of people you may have not have heard of.
You bet.
And so, but I think the influence me. The first person,
and also tell us what kind of impact they casted on you.
Okay, the first person that I want to say, his name was Lloyd Homme, Homme. And Dr. Lloyd Homme had actually worked with B.F. Skinner at the lab on performance improvement or performance instruction, and he then left that work and then moved to New Mexico, and that's where I met in New Mexico, and that's where I started working, or I told you I was one of the students that were testing program instruction.
Right.
So I just kept learning stuff from him along the way. I was a mentor. The next person at that same time was a person by the name of Don Toasty. T-O-S-T.
Oh yeah, of course.
Actually, a lot of people don't know, but Don Toasty is my brother.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Is your real brother?
He's really my real brother. Yes.
Really? Well, unfortunately, he left us a few years ago, right?
Yeah,
is that right?
Yeah, he passed away about 4 years ago.
4 years ago, right?
Yeah, we had
You're a real brother. I never know that.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that. But anyway, so
your real brother. You know, when you say that, you do look alike. You do look alike. Yeah, you have the genes. I mean, wow.
Anyway, but again, I learned a lot from him. Actually,
I did too. Yeah.
Another funny story is people said, "How did you get to ISBI?" And this is going backwards. Is that my brother was also working for Lloyd Homme, and there was a conference. There was a conference going to be held, program instruction in San Antonio, Texas. And so my brother said to his family, "Would you like to go to Texas to take a vacation?" And this was in 1962. And so I said, "Sure, I'll go with you and take a vacation." So I went. I can't say I went to the conference, but actually I went to the first conference in 1962 as part of my vacation.
ISPI was founded in 1962 and was in San Antonio. Both you and Don Toasty, your brother, were the founding members of ISPI then.
I can't say I was a founding member, but I was certainly there at the same time. So
you're the first one to attend you're the first batch to attend the conference. I mean, you were there for the first conference.
I was there. I probably didn't realize what was happening at that time.
How many people then?
Probably a few hundred, maybe.
Wow.
And the first, I think I saw the first conference cost, I think it was like less than $100 to attend the conference.
Even the registration fee.
Registration fee, right? So
in 2015, and we went back to ISPI conference was in San Antonio. Was that in 2015 or 2016? 15, I think.
15, I think it was, yeah.
Yeah, in San Antonio, we were there. Yeah. And a lot of people are talking about it, at the Hyatt Hotel, Hyatt Regency, if you remember. You were there, right?
I was there, yeah.
And a lot of people are saying, "Oh, how can we get the old group to get together?" Something like that. And I was wondering, okay, 1962, let me jump onto a time machine to travel back and see what had happened. So you were actually there.
Right, yeah. I was there, yes.
Great. I mean, at another time, actually, I have another interview just on the first conference. I'm just joking. Because I mean, there are so many practitioners in PI and in learning development, they do need to hear something of some of the very valuable histories and to see where this industry evolved.
So then another, you had other people along the way that had influence. A person by the name of George Geiss, and George.
Oh yeah, of course.
And George Geiss was one of the, he worked with Gary Rumler, and so I learned a lot from him around and a lot of things instruction wise. He was a wonderful presenter. I mean, his knowledge was just vast, and he worked with Gary Rumler, and so Gary Rumler was another important figure in my development. Joe Harless, his models on Joe Harless. Certainly Bob Mager. I learned a lot from Bob Mager. Margot Murray, learned a lot from Margot Murray. Alison Rossett is another person along the way that always has good sound work. So Harold Stolovich's work is just wonderful. I'm probably missing lots of people out there, but those are people who come off the top of my head that made a difference in what I did.
You bet. All the last 3 or 4 people there on my list too.
Good.
Alison Rosette, Margot Murray, and Harold, and also his wife Erica Keeps.
Erica. Erica is a really good practitioner of performance improvement, so she's a good one. Yeah, she's a good one to interview too.
I may have them both on the screen, just to see them chatting.
I think that'd be fun to have both of them together. Yes. You
bet. They're a great pair. They're a great pair. We had a fun in 2017 when we were in the conference in Montreal. If you remember, we were in Montreal. Yes.
Well, by the way, another person who is more contemporary, who I think is one of the best thinkers we have around, is Klaus Wittgen. And Klaus is his model,
oh yeah, of course.
His models are quite good. So I recommend him on your list also to interview, because he's he's one of my, actually I've worked with him for many years as well.
Yes. Klaus is also on top of my list, and I contacted him like 2 weeks ago, and he's holding up all right. Everybody's staying home right now,
I know. I talk to him or send him a mail most every day just to see how he's doing.
You bet. You're a great pal. You're great pals. Okay. So you have done, sir, you have done a lot of consulting projects, and a lot of them are in PI, and a lot of names you mentioned, like you have the students, B.F. Skinner, the great thinker, as your teacher, and your brother, of course, influenced you. I just wonder, you're at an earlier stage of your career, was there any opportunities that you had a flash idea that you're not going to be in PI, but you're going to devote yourself in learning development specifically? And then you decide you didn't.
I can't say that learning is not one of the interventions. So it's always part of what I've done. So I can't say that I don't do that. It's not my focal point. But but again, often what you found out is that if it was one of the interventions that was called for, then of course I would recommend it. So just
right.
But also the other thing too is that also I could find people in the field that were much better at it than I was. So I would hire them to do the learning modules. So anyway, that's
the reason I'm asking is that because a lot of them, by a lot, I mean millions of learning development professionals here in China and other developing countries, they're facing career choices. Right now PI is there. I mean, with the internet, everybody knows what PI is, performance improvement is, but they're still at the training job, and they're at the stage of upgrading themselves from learning development to a wider scope of performance improvement or business improvement or result improvement or efficiency, everything, but basically results, business results, and nothing but results. Right. so they're kind of watching and to do what they should. So they're perplexed, and they probably haven't made up their mind yet. But what you just gave us example is your career story, your real story, that you look at learning development as only one of the many interventions among all the performance interventions.
Well, okay. One of the things, and I think you asked me this in another question, is that
Right.
one of the things that is important to me is what we call the 4 W's. Okay, the first W is the worker. So, and that's when you see maybe training being an appropriate solution to a learning intervention. But often I said, if that's only one little piece of the puzzle, and this is a big puzzle, one piece of the puzzle is that they have to do some type of work. So that's the second W, or the processes. So the processes people have to be able to do them. And sometimes the processes are not easy to do in organizations. So you have to have a good process. And that's where I learned that a lot from that work from Gary Rumler. Gary Rumler, I think, was one of the best process people around. And then the next, and also he also learned from him, was that you've got to have some contacts in the workplace, and to make a difference to the workplace or the enterprise. And so the workplace became the third W. So that's what I'm thinking. As a performance improvement consultant, you've got to look at the worker, the work, and the workplace. And then finally, working on from the work of Roger Kaufman, when he talked about mega, I said, well, it's got to probably have some type of impact. And that's when we added world to this. So our analysis became, first of all, what we're doing has any impact on the world, what we're actually doing. And if we can really look at a bigger picture and say that, then I think we can make a difference in what we're trying to do to our planet. So that's just how I'm looking at the performance consulting today. So my advice would be, if you're an instructional designer or whatever, try to at least have a big picture of what you're trying to accomplish in your instruction. You're trying to accomplish people doing the work, the processes, where they do the work, that's the workplace. And then, is there anything that you actually can have impact in the world? And again, I think if you also look at what's happening today with this pandemic, we're all connected.
Right.
Whether we like it or not, we're all connected. So we're all trying to make some type of impact. And so you can see what happens in one part of the world has a very, very impact to other parts of the world. So we're not, I don't think we're separate. I never have thought that, by the way. I think we've always been connected.
Yeah, that was my question that I'm going to ask you, that we changed from 3W to 4W. I asked the question was because that when I was at school doing my degree, a master's degree in instructional design, performance improvement, I was taught like by my professor Chris LaCroix. She retired right now, and she told us the 3 W's: the work, the worker, and the work, the worker, and the workplace.
Right.
So, and then when did it become 4 W's and added the world? Who did that?
I added the 4th W.
You did.
Yeah. So, and that because just I started doing, more, actually I started doing more work with Roger Kaufman. And mega was, to me, it's a hard word for people to understand. So I said, well, if we just talk about the 4th W, the world, so impact to the world. So that's how it got started. So Roger and I, actually, we just did an article together on the pandemic issues around the mega world aspects of it, which is published in ISPI.
Of course, there are a lot of similarities between mega and the world. Right. So there are a lot of ties. There's a lot of things in common. They tie together. Right. They all try to, look at the macro environment. So, but what are the differences? Even minute differences.
I think the only difference is what he calls it mega, and I call it world.
But all the tools are you guys, the tools are the same, or
yeah, pretty much the same. I think he has his own models, but I mean, if you look at them, most of the models have similarities, and guess what? The similarities are RSVP.
You bet. Here you go.
he focuses on results. He thinks about systems. Actually, I just found his first book he ever wrote, and it was basically around systems. So that's kind of funny.
Right. He published like 39 books or something like that.
Oh,
he did.
He's published a lot of books, yes.
Yes, a lot of them, and then 300 articles, something like that, and still counting. So
I know. What was interesting is that I do a quarterly articles with an organization called Business Process Trends, BP Trends. And Carol Haig and I have been doing these articles. And I said, well, I wonder how many articles I did with just BP Trends. And we pulled up all the articles. And if you go to their website, there's over 40 articles that she and I have done on that website. And then there's another website, which is HPT Treasure. And I said, I wonder how many articles I have on HPT Treasure. And Carol and I had done over 100 articles and interviews on that one. So I said, these things add up pretty quickly about how many articles and books and things like you've done. So I've done, I can't say as many as Roger has, but certainly they do accumulate very quickly.
I still want to use the word model that we mentioned earlier.
That's all right. It's a good word. It's a good word.
It is something that we really look up to. I mean, during your long career, and then it's cumulative, and of course you have contributed many articles and wisdoms and intelligence to all of us and professional for our professional development.
There's the things you have to remember about models is that all models are useful and all models are wrong.
They're all relative.
They're all, because
relativity.
They all have a context. So they all can be useful, but guess what? They can have their flaws also. You bet.
That's a great warning. That's a great warning, and thank you for that. I mean, that's really applicable to all of our viewers as well, because in China, in China and the other developing countries, we're growing very fast and trying very hard, trying to get something fast and easy, and try to grasp and something tangible, something applicable, and we want results overnight. So and then we rely on models a lot heavily.
And again, I think the difference between somebody new to the field, they'll find a model or they'll find something that they like, and that's what they use over and over and over again. But actually, as the more you get experience, you find out some of those models just don't work. And that's when you start becoming an expert. So you've got to really look at how to use different approaches in the right context.
Exactly. All models should, I absolutely agree with you. All the models should work. That reminds me, one of the, famous lines, it's a Honda auto parts, like, Domino's Honda parts, they do the Domino's like 59 seconds. And at the very end, the good old Garrison Keillor came in. Wouldn't it be nice wouldn't it be nice when something just work?
I know. I go back to what I think.
Excuse me.
I go back to what I said. It's like, I wish online learning just worked.
You bet. And I think that's everybody's wish. So you have been doing, Roger, you have done a lot of consulting projects. What do you see are the challenges of PI consulting projects, the performance improvement consulting projects?
Well, I think from my perspective is that when you go in on a consulting project, often the person who brought you in has a solution to what the problem was. and they want you to verify what they thought it was. And it's really, really sometimes very difficult to say, oh, can we just step back and let me do some observations before we come up to any conclusions. And that's always the hard thing, because people want a quick fix.
You really have to have the guts to say that, right?
It took me a while. Yes, I certainly didn't do that when I first started.
You bet, you bet.
But again, I just say, that's what you brought me in for. And I'm going to try to give you, at least from my perspective, how I see what the issues are.
You bet. That's one challenge. That do you see any other challenges that common? Like, what do you have sum up with RSVP, or what are the common challenges that when you do PI projects?
It's not necessarily a challenge, but then because I work with different industries, one of the things you've got to do before you go work in the industry is find out about them and use their language as quickly as possible. So you basically don't use our language when you go with an organization. You try, so if you're in the financial organization, you try to use financial words. If you're in the computer industry, you try to use computer. If you're in the medical, actually, one of the industries that works very easily for us is the medical industry, because performance improvement is a diagnostic, prescriptive approach, and that's how they talk. And basically, we are science-driven, so are they. So, there's some nice little pictorials about what doctors do and what performance consultants do, and actually, they're very similar.
You bet, you bet. Yeah, yeah. It really coincides to the good old proverb, all roads leads to Rome. So still something hanging around. Just one last question on being a consulting leader. So what do you think does it take? What does it take in your mind, in your opinion, to make a good performance consultant?
First of all, do your homework before you go in and talk to your client, and then focus on your client and their customer. Because what you want to do is go to the next level up. Why are you brought in the first place? What's the business issue that's getting in the way of them performing or being at their peak performance? So you're trying to look at how can you have impact on not only them, but also their customer. So if you think, then if you really want to get big on it, how does that affect the world?
Here you go.
Right.
It comes around.
Right, it comes around, right.
You bet. That's a great advice. When you said do your homework, by homework, do you mean you just mentioned to speak their language and know their line profession or know their occupation?
Well,
can you elaborate a little bit more?
I don't think you necessarily have to know their occupation, but you have to know the company that has brought you in. You need to know something about them. And so the first thing I always try to do is go to the website of that organization and try to read as much as I can about who they are. Most of the time, also, they have a history page.
You bet.
I always go to the history page because I always find out a lot of things about the organization on their history. So I go to the
and they're about us, right? About us.
Right. So I look at their corporate structure. I look at their mission and visions and value statements that are usually there. I try to go back and look at the history of the organization. Just some. I love to have when they have pictures.
You bet.
About their organization. And there's some great websites out there. So I think that's the first thing I do. And then the next thing I do is I try to find out, are there any, if you go on if they sell stock on the stock exchange, and I know a lot of places don't, but I try to go to the stock exchange and see what articles have been written about them, or are they written about themselves?
Yep. Yeah.
So just as, and again, I'm not saying that's going to take a long time, it's maybe an afternoon's work, but
You bet.
it's just enough so you don't go in there blind.
You bet. You bet. So we just mentioned that performance architect. So tell us something about this book, and what's your major point in this book, and why did you write this book with Carol Haig and Lynn Kearney?
Well, I've worked with Lynn and Carol for many, many years, and we talked about what we had. We need some tools and resources so people can use at different levels. So then, therefore, we decided to break the book up into the worker in the workplace and the models and tools that go with those three levels. So that's how it came about. Now, performance architecture is a word that I coined with another person. And this goes back to the 1980s. I was introduced to a man by the name is Mark Johnson. And Mark Johnson is an architect. And we started comparing some of the work that he does or did and some of the work that I was doing. Excuse me.
Take your time.
And when we started looking at the models and started looking at the work he was doing and coming up what he does and what I do, it became very apparent they're very similar. So he was the architect of performance architecture, and I was the performance side. So that's when we start bringing those two models together, and we've been working ever since on different projects and different things. So that's how performance architecture came about. And the point that Carol and Lynn and I wanted to make was that could we do something that helped people look at tools and resources on those three levels? We didn't touch the fourth level. Now, we've written articles about it since then, but we didn't touch the fourth level because of the size of the book. I mean, it was always publishers always give you limitations, unfortunately. But that's how it came about. And then the other thing too is that we wanted to leave people with something easy, and we wanted to have a lot of pictures. So what was nice about it, we spent 2 days with Gary Rumler. Go back to Gary. We spent 2 days with Gary Rumler, and he basically opened up his whole library to us. And that's
wow.
That was really great.
And which year was that?
Well, go look. What was the year the book came out? I always forget what year the book came out. And so it was like it was early.
You probably have written a lot of books, and this is just one of them.
I can say that's the latest one. I can't remember what year it came out. It should be right in the front.
I think this is a newer edition. Newer edition.
Right. But it was about a year before.
2008.
Okay.
2009.
So probably 2007 is that when we went to visit him, or maybe before.
Right. And Gary passed away in 2010, probably 2011.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Around that time. Yeah, because I literally cried on my desk.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
I was.
I was in Ireland. I was at a conference in Ireland when I heard about it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Anyway, great mind, great mastermind.
Actually, it was interesting about that is that Carol Haig and I are coming out with an article that's just now being published in Performance Express, and what we're doing is going back and looking at some of his early work and some of his early videos. So I'll send you the link to that when it's published. I think you'll enjoy looking at it because we talk. It's got a lot of links to his videos that he did in the 1960s and 70s.
You bet. Any work or research or interesting project you're working on right now? Something new that coming out of his way, and you can tell us, or preview, or 30 seconds trailer.
I'll tell you what the problem is right now is that because I've been shut in for 3 months. It's even sometimes hard to think about it. But again, I'm interested in, again, I just finished that article with Roger, that he was kind enough to work with him on that. But
Right.
something I'm thinking about world impact is, because I think right now we see that has something to do with what we're trying to accomplish.
Right.
Yeah.
That's really a next question. Really, kind of leads into the next question is how does the current pandemic, change the PI field or consulting business?
Well, I thought that was
not only financially, I mean, but comprehensively.
Interesting question too, because I mentioned earlier one of the things that make us have value to the organization is that we can do observation. And right now, it's very, very difficult to do any observation in organizations. So
yeah.
I think so. Right now, it's going to be, from my perspective, that would be a very, very difficult thing to do.
Right.
But
it is next to impossible, or even just absolutely impossible right now to do the side-by-side observations.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So I think that was one of the things. I think that's the main thing right now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Make it challenging.
You bet. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But there's still some interesting things going on. I know I still get emails from people working on performance improvement projects around the world, and so there's some challenges. But people they're getting ready. So when this starts opening up a little bit, they'll be ready to go with some of the things. There's going to be a good conference, online conference, I hope, in September. It's the EMEA conference. That's the performance improvement conference that focuses on the more of the.
You mean last year or the coming one?
This one. It'll be online. It'll be online.
It's be online too.
I talked to Carol Panza about it, and they're getting ready to put it online. They already have a case study worked out, and it's going to come from South Africa. I talked to Billy Nell, and Billy is coming up with one of her clients to be part of the case study. So I think it'll be interesting to see what they can do around. And then I think that I may do a session with them also. So that would be one maybe to look for.
Billy has just awarded the Distinguished Service Award, right?
Yes, she did.
Yep. Good for her. And she's also on my list.
Right. Good.
So, yeah. That's so right now we have so many learning development professionals, and they have heard PI, and they're now moving into performance improvement. But you have been into developing countries, and you have been to China, and you have seen a lot. So is there any difference when you give advice to the learning development professionals who are ready to move into PI in the United States or in the Western world, or to those who are in the developing countries?
Well, I think this, I don't know if this thing sounds strange, but I think in developing countries, you have an advantage.
What advantage?
I think you have an advantage is that you can basically, there's a lot of resources out there that didn't exist when I first started. And so I would say take advantages of the resources that exist in performance improvement and seeing how it can apply to your organizations. And understand, again, going back, if you've got a performance issue in the organization, try to solve it from a standpoint as it's not the worker, it's probably the system. And if you can look at it from that standpoint, you can have more value to your organization. And again, I think from a developing country is, yes, we need to get the skills and knowledge into the culture, into the organizations. And you have a great opportunity to say, how are we going to solve some of these bigger issues that are out there, just beside more than just skills and knowledge acquisition, skills and knowledge. So at least that's what so I mean, the opportunities are much bigger, I think, that developing countries have than, basically sometimes we get stuck in our own ways. So
You said three times that it is probably not the people. The people are already there, but it's a system that not working in. It kind of it's a general warning or general starting place and starting point. And why do you think that way? I mean, is that the conclusion that you have seen? I mean, you draw from many
just something that I've seen.
cases.
Something that I've seen over and over and over. It's, you know, people work in systems,
Right.
and if you work in systems, and your system is not, it's not working together, working in silos,
Right.
then I think you have the problem. And I think, you know, Gary Rumler, going back to Gary's work, you know, one of the things that he discovers, managing the white space.
Right, that great book, yeah.
And so it's, you know, that sort of tells it all. Is that if you work in silos, my output is your input, and if I don't give you good input, you can't do your job.
Right.
If my system doesn't work, and I pass it on to you, you can't do your work. So we all work in a system.
Is that partial? Is that also one of the reasons that you don't call HPT, but you prefer more performance improvement because you try to avoid the human side, and you think that it's more than a human side, right?
I look at, because again, I go back and look at, there are people doing work in an environment, and all that's got to work together. It's a system, and all it's going to.
Yes, it's a mega. Here you go.
It's a mega, and again, you know, Klaus and I've got a nice little model that can, another model, but basically can map out that whole thing very quickly. And then, don't forget, is that I work in a system, and then my manager also works in a system, and his manager or her manager works on a system. So all those have to work together.
Right. You have also been considered, you are also, I mean, after all this long career, you are yourself also considered one of the legends of the PI industry, and worldwide, actually. So looking back, if you had a chance to do it all over again, what would you do differently? That's a hard question. I hope not, but.
No, it's a hard question. No,
fun question.
Yeah, it's a fun question. One of the things that I wish that I had done earlier was to step back and look at the whole organization, and not. Sometimes when you work inside an organization, you try to please your boss.
You bet.
And that's the hard part. And so you really got to say, okay, it's almost like a yes, I need, or yes, it'd be good to please your boss and do the right thing. And sometimes doing the right thing is not necessarily pleasing your boss. And that's Again, as an outside consultant, that's easier to do. But I've been inside an organization and I've been outside an organization, and that's one of the things I wish I'd done earlier in my career, especially working inside, is saying, just sitting down with the people that I work with closely and say, well, wait a minute, let's discover this together and come up with solutions that's going to make sense to the organization.
But you just said that when you started in the 70s and 60s, and then there wasn't any, big giant figure there like yourself to us today, and then we can look up to, we can follow the models or the methodologies and RSVPs and principles. But at that time, you didn't have a lot. But today's world, in 2020, there's millions of practitioners. They do, right? That's
there's a lot more resources.
Right.
When we started, there were a few people that there were articles being written, there were workshops you'd go to, but there wasn't a whole lot. There's lots of books, there's lots of resources out there. Just go find them. And go back to go look at the HPT Treasure website. that's got a lot of resources on it. I mean, it's just full of resources.
You bet, you bet. So when they got the same challenges like what you guys 50 years ago, half a century ago, like you have to do the job, right? And then you have to please your boss. I mean, unfortunately, I assume, and this is probably is still true today, that it's still a very common phenomenon or challenges are, I mean, the L&D professionals are facing today in their daily jobs. But right now they have different resources. I mean, they have a lot of resources, right? That's the point I think you make.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of more resources out there.
You bet.
But don't forget, there's a lot of resources that are not scientific or have a science background too. They're fads.
Right.
So don't get trapped into the next fad. Make sure that you go to, challenge yourself. What's the research behind some of the work? And so I think that's important to do.
Right. We're getting close to our very easy chat for you, but we did ask a lot of good questions. I mean, that's the question that I had and all our viewers had. And one thing that I want to come out of the interview that I want to thank you on behalf of me and myself and Ding Hui and Hui Ding, or in English, Hui, that when we met in Warsaw, right? Right. And that was in 2014 at the EMEA conference, and you and Klaus were there, and then you gave us the advice to change from processing factors to drivers. Right. And that was a hit to our model, and we kept working on that. Yeah.
I think one of the things that I think you always have to think about doing is making words that have some type of meaning for your clients.
You bet.
I think going back to, I remember that going to your session, I said to class, I said, those guys got something good. go listen.
Thank you.
Find out. Yeah, go listen to what they've got, find out what they've got. So I think that I'll have a good model But again, don't forget, all models are good, but all models are flawed. so
context. I got that. Yeah. We're trying to beat you in that aspect.
Good. Okay. Good.
My Roger, just a little bit of preview that our English book is coming out this year. So because it's already developed a lot, way more than that we presented back in 2014. So
good. I'm looking forward to seeing it.
You bet. You will have a copy too.
Okay.
And one of the first copies. Last question. Do you have any closing comment to our viewers, millions of viewers? And do you have anything that you want to say, or you want to comment, or you want to remind, or as advice or suggestion, or anything that you want to say to the young practitioners?
I think education is important. I think the idea of reading about our profession is important. And then questioning, do these things make sense? And then also, do they make sense in my culture? Sometimes performance improvement models and words and context don't make sense in other cultures. So you got to adapt it to your own environment, to your own culture. That's just how I think. And even to the word performance improvement, sometimes that doesn't even translate into various languages, and you've got to translate into something that makes sense. And in my last story, as I remember, actually it was in Taiwan. I was giving a presentation, and my lecture was going to be interpreted in Chinese. So I sat down with my interpreter, and I was telling him, he was reading over my text, and I came up with I was talking about the Pygmalion effect. Are you familiar with the Pygmalion effect is? So the Pygmalion effect, and he said, what's that? And so I started talking to him about it. He says, oh, don't worry. We have a story just like that in Chinese. So it's a matter of, you got to interpret it into your own languages. And I think one of the things that I think that you've done good at it is that you try to basically adapt the models to a Chinese culture. I think that's one thing that I think is important. Again, and Belia has worked in South Africa, and one of the things I learned a long time ago as a consultant going into different countries, I will always have to have somebody in that country that will work with me, because I am an outsider coming into Europe. So I'm a performance consultant tourist. And I need somebody who understands the culture so we can get things done. So that's just my parting advice is, just as, you know, if you were coming to work in the United States, is that you would have a partner here in the United States that would help understand the nuances and the culture of the U.S. Even though you lived here, it's you know there's differences.
Yep, I do.
Right.
Yep. Thank you, Roger. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Can I ask just one last question?
Sure.
Why Don and you have the different last names? And
because my brothers, we had the same mother, and my brother's father died when he was very young, and then my mother remarried, so that's why.
Got it. So thank you. It's a personal fact, but as a human, we want a human touch from a training master. So that's why asking.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for thinking of me. That was great.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you. And we wish you very well, and and stay safe, please, sir. Stay safe.
I'm staying safe. I'm staying inside.
Thank you.
Okay. Talk to you later.
Okay. See you later.